All right. Good afternoon, everybody who's watching. Of course, I'm the Politicrat, like always. I think that I need no introduction on that point. But today we have joining us again for the first time, I think about a year, a little over a year ago, James Kirkpatrick. Last time went by Gregory Hood,
Yeah, I
paleoconservative.
suppose I suppose
Yeah.
we can just get all that out of the way. Real name's Kevin Deanna, right under the name of James Kirkpatrick for VDare, and that's how I'm known on Twitter. And then Gregory Hood for American Renaissance. Obviously, the question, why even bother putting up with this? And the answer basically is, 15 years ago when it started out, it was a different time, and now they're just kind of brands. But if I could, I would just wrap everything under Kevin Deanna.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. It was I remember I saw a very, very lovely, very kind SPLC Soviet Poverty Lie Center article on you that one time. It was after the I think it was after the thing with the Leadership Institute
Oh
incident.
yeah. Well, that was which one? I mean,
Yeah.
LI was where I was for more than a decade. I mean, the funny
Yeah.
thing is, I mean, we're going to get into what conservatism Inc. really is. And one thing I actually kind of want to make clear, which might be a little surprising, is I don't really have any hard feelings against LI. LI never did anything to me. I just think that the situation now at Leadership Institute also seems to be the situation in a lot of these conservative organizations, where it's actually much worse post-Trump than it was before Trump, because
Mhm.
they're much more paranoid and they're much more scared.
Mhm. I'm not going to name drop anything, but my girlfriend was actually an intern at the Leadership Institute, and but did mention that a lot of it was like you sort of had these sort of like people who put on an almost like a fake evangelical, like old school cookie cutter Christian
Oh,
conservative mask,
oh yeah.
but then like it wasn't, but they didn't necessarily express the values that on the surface they should otherwise be espousing. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, that's always been a chronic thing in the conservative movement. And I mean, one of the earliest things that kind of, I'm perhaps dating myself here, but one of the things that really shook me early on was, gay marriage was one of the main issues when I first got involved in this kind of stuff. And I just remember a lot of evangelicals swearing up and down and left and right that they would sooner die than give into this stuff. But then when the Supreme Court said this is the law of the land, I mean, they just instantly folded. And this idea of kind of going along to get along, and the idea that there's nothing really outside the system that we can do, I think really defines the American right in a way that people outside just don't fully get. They think that the American right is scary. They think the American right is dedicated. They think the American right is zealous. But a lot of these guys are they're already beaten. They've already accepted defeat. And rejecting that mindset, I think, is the single most important thing we can do right now.
Hmm. And then, I mean, you have seen previous iterations of, I mean, and then I think another thing is, and this is kind of the straw man of the right, they're almost viewed as this sort of monolithic force. Like, so for instance, like if you see like on an MSNBC, they'll say far right or right wing or whatever. And first of all, whenever I
Yeah.
see the headline far right, I'm immediately skeptical of what is actually, it's like Charlie Kirk. He's so far right. Like, no, he's not.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
no,
I mean,
but
so much of what there's a popular kind of tweet or post out there that it basically says liberals don't know things. That their entire worldview is shaped by the consumption of fiction, and part of that consumption of fiction is not just Marvel movies and things like that. It's also what they see on TV,
the
and
generation raised on Harry Potter, basically.
yeah, but also what they're reacting against in terms of the quote unquote far right are just these narratives that are created by the news media. And so they really are scared of the far right, but the far right that they're scared of only exists in their imagination. There's not, George Bush, for example, who was the big boogeyman when I was first starting out. He said the worst thing that ever happened during his presidency, the worst day of his administration, was when Kanye West told him he didn't care about black people. Like the idea of being called a racist was worse to him than 9/11. And this fundamentally like beaten, defeated, moral sanction only comes for our enemies. Why don't you like us? This is indicative of the entire American right, where there's nothing within them that makes them like self-motivated. They have no moral reference outside what their enemies are telling them. And I think liberals don't really understand how dominant they are, not just in the culture wars, but also in terms of defining morality. Because a lot of people in the conservative movement, really what they want is they just want like liberals to like them. I mean, some could say that that's Donald Trump's big flaw, is that he wants respect and appreciation from people who utterly despise him.
Yeah. No, I think what about in terms of policy? Where do you think some of the biggest sort of shifts on policy from when you were, because just to as a frame of reference, some people will say, oh yeah, the Republican Party's gone way more to the right. You'll have other people who said they've gone way more to the left. Like maybe, I mean, I could imagine maybe on like some rhetorical issues, like in some ways, I guess that is right on immigration. I guess it depends on whether you like how you define left or right, because back in like the Reagan days, for instance, the GOP was like open borders basically. But like other than maybe on that issue, where has it legitimately gone to the right, and on what issues do you think it's actually gone to the left? And how do you think, like if you were to repackage a sort of coherent like conservatism that you see would be successful, what would you like? How would you combine that? Like how would you put that together?
There's a lot of big questions there. So let's set some of the context. When we talk about things going to the right, I think it's important for people to understand where we've been and where the state of public opinion was, even during times like the Reagan administration. So if you look at polls from the time, because remember, when you're working at some of these organizations, you have institutional memory that goes back decades. You can look at polls like during the Reagan administration, when it was a serious issue whether, say, homosexuals should be allowed to be public school teachers. And you would see like huge polls saying, no, this should not be allowed under any circumstances. And then you look at, say, the public schools today. During the George W. Bush administration, why did he win the second term? Because he got evangelicals to turn out, and they were going to pass a constitutional amendment banning gay marriage. Of course, we didn't see any action on that. Now, the very thought of that is completely unthinkable. And of course, it was Donald Trump who was the first presidential candidate who ran accepting gay marriage as a plank. If you think of where the conservative movement has been on immigration, I wouldn't say that under Reagan. I mean, there were obviously some open borders voices. Peter Brimelow always brings up that the Wall Street Journal for a while had a plank saying that the United States should have open borders, that was going to be a constitutional amendment. But if you think of the Reagan amnesty, I mean, he basically was suckered. The idea was that we have millions of people in the country. It would be mean to kick them out, but we can't let this happen again. So we're going to have certain enforcement mechanisms, and then we're just never going to let this happen again. And then, of course, none of the enforcement mechanisms came through. But now the idea that we can kick these people out, I mean, Trump is running on this, but there doesn't seem to be much acceptance from the rest of the Republican Party on that. The Republican Party, as we speak, is currently rushing with unseemly haste to try to get an amnesty negotiated with President Biden before Trump can get in. Dwight D. Eisenhower, who every once in a while liberals will say, oh, I wish the Republican Party was a moderate like in the days of Eisenhower. Well, it was Eisenhower who launched Operation Wetback and just kicked these people out of the country. I mean, now these are things that you're not going to find outside the quote unquote fringes or from a Trump statement, which, yeah, he's the front runner, but will he actually follow through on this stuff? Who knows? I mean, let's face it, if he had followed through on his immigration policies in 2016, what he actually ran on, we wouldn't have a problem right now. It'd be hard to say what problems we would even have. So in every one of these cases, and this goes with just about every issue you can think of, there's usually a lot of public opinion on your side. You usually have a majority for policies that you would consider almost unrealistically right-wing in terms of like what you could actually do. And even that kind of understates the case because there's no media backing for these things. There's no educated people giving arguments for why you should be allowed to do this. I mean, it's just people at a gut level understanding that this is good for the country, but nobody's speaking up for them. But nobody takes this weapon that's just lying on the ground. I mean, the thing about the populist right, if you can call it that, is that it never loses. It's always just betrayed. The potential is always there, but nobody quite acts on it. Trump was one of the first ones to actually like pick up the weapon, but he didn't actually use it for anything. He just kind of swung it around and threatened everybody with it. But, eventually people figured out he's all talk. And, we'll see if he's learned his lesson, right? I mean, unfortunately, for better or worse, he's the guy right now. I mean, you see the shirt I'm wearing. I don't think there's any alternative. In terms of where the movement is, I think the conservative movement, about half the people in it, and I don't mean this as an insult to people in the conservative movement generally. There are a lot of good people in it. I still got friends in it. There are a lot of people who helped me out over the years. But I think about half the people are only there because they're trying to climb up to a certain point on the ladder, and then they can sell out, betray everybody, spill all their secrets to journalists, and then get a job in the real media or at a real think tank and spend their days profiling the far right or complaining about the people they used to work with, because they just sort of take it for granted that the culture is always going to move in one direction. But it doesn't have to be that way. I think one of the fundamental truths that we have to get through our head is that there's nothing accidental about the way the culture moves, and there's nothing inevitable about it. It's shaped by power, and you really can use power to push the culture in a certain direction and to create incentives that are going to force people to behave differently. And we only have to look at other countries around the world where we can see how cultures shifted in ways that nobody would have expected 50 years before. But it requires leadership, and it requires something from the top down. Populism as a strategy can never really win. It just provides potential. I mean, you do need elites willing to take up these challenges and actually use power that's there. And they're going to do it for their own interests. I have no illusions that Donald Trump cares about anything other than himself. But my hope is that he understands that this is the only political force at his disposal, and he's going to use this power for his own benefit, but almost accidentally also benefit us.
And I think that is a good point that you make about how like populism isn't like a sustainable, is only like really works as a strategy, but you still need the elite. But whereas you have people who make populism an ideology, which I think is one of kind of defeats the purpose in a lot of ways. Like, I don't know, I will sometimes go and watch like left-wing YouTubers, like, you know, like Kyle Kalinske, people like that, like how he'll be like talking about, okay, populism for populism's sake. Okay, like his ideology is just whatever all of the people want. And it's like, well, sometimes the people want stupid things. Like,
Well, the people don't know what they want. I mean,
exactly.
I should kind of clarify this. I think there are two things. There is a kind of folk wisdom where if you kind of take a step back, it's actually impressive on how wise it can be, where I think there is sort of a gut instinct that people in general have about their interests. I have a saying that the left is always right on the specifics, but the right is always correct about what's really at stake. So if you're debating a certain issue, the left will, you know, a typical leftist intellectual will probably know more about the specific figures or the consequences of a specific policy, but the right will have a better gut understanding about where this is all going. So, for example, let's return to gay marriage for a second. You had a lot of people, you know, pastors and grassroots activists saying a lot of unhinged stuff about the consequences of gay marriage. A lot of the things, the specific things they predicted didn't happen or couldn't happen. But then if you go 15 years down the line, I mean, it's obvious that they correctly predicted where the culture was going to go. And a lot of the consequences are far worse than people on the left were predicting. I think with populism, public opinion is generally dictated, and people believe what they're allowed to believe and what they're encouraged to believe. But there's a lot you can do with sort of those gut instincts and those gut impulses. And it's long been a theory of mine that people are generally as right wing, if I can use that term, as they are allowed to be. They want to pursue their collective interests. They have a sense of what their collective interests are. I mean, that's what it is to be a people. I think that a nation precedes the state, that the community precedes the state. And so that presupposes that there's a people with a kind of collective consciousness and an understanding of what their gut instincts, what their gut interests are. But somebody has to define what those things are. Somebody has to give them moral permission to pursue those things. And right now, the American right doesn't really have that. So much of the conservative movement is basically people coming down from the mountaintop to the grassroots and saying, listen, I know you want to do this, but our principles forbid us from pursuing our interests. That's the single biggest problem with the American right now. That's why Trumpism is so encouraging, because you have somebody coming to the people and saying, hey, actually, you're right. And you have this kind of inchoate sense of America is going wrong, or maybe you're angry about the way things are, but this is specifically what we need to do. These are the people who are to blame. These are the things we can use to transform things. But you still need people at the top who are serious about accomplishing these things, who are serious about using state power, who are serious about creating a new cultural regime, a new order. And unfortunately, I think the problem with the Trump movement is similar to the problem with the conservative movement generally, which is that there are a lot of people who sort of assume, hey, we can't actually win, or it's risky if we try to win. Therefore, I'm going to approach this essentially as a business. And I'm going to use this to make some money selling books, telling people what they want to hear. And then I'm just going to kind of get out and move
Take the
away
money
from the
and run.
move away from the consequences of decline. I mean, the John Derbyshire, wrote this book, We Are Doomed, where he basically said, like, we're going to lose. And Spengler, of course, said optimism is cowardice. I mean, obviously, you see the bust of Evola behind me. I mean, certainly few people can call him an optimist. But I think it's very important not to concede that decline is inevitable. Even if you're caught in a historical cycle that seems that's inevitable, I mean, cycles end, right? New cycles begin. You have to have it in your head that not only that you can win, but that you're going to win. Because the minute you let that poison into your head that, look, we're going to lose no matter what, and we're just kind of marking time or basically setting an example for future generations or something like that, I think that inevitably leads to nihilism, and it inevitably leads to careerism, where you essentially say, this is a business, I'm just going to make as much as I can, and then I'm going to move away from everybody and say, I got mine.
Do you think that defines a lot of the conservative movement today?
Absolutely.
Like
Absolutely. I think
like Jonah Goldberg, like Jonah Goldberg.
Jonah Goldberg, I mean,
David French.
We're going to get into some sensitive territory, but I mean, I just think Jonah Goldberg has no particular attachment to the United States as such. I mean, it's always just been a career for him. I mean, what does he care about the United States? What does he care about the American people? But if you think of, all right, one of the stories that I always tell is there was a guy, I'm not going to give his name or anything like that, and he was always nice to me and everything like that, but this is a guy who was very politically connected, worked on the Hill, worked for various congressmen, somebody who worked at a pretty high level. And this was when the SPLC was coming after me for the very first time. And they called me in and they kind of went over everything I had said. This is back when we were like sponsoring Richard Spencer to speak at like college campuses and stuff, like 2015, 2014 or something. And they said, you're saying all this stuff, but you got to kind of tone it down with some of these things, but we're not going to fire you. I'm like, all right. And I said, well, do you think I'm right about the consequences of mass immigration, turning us into a permanent minority? And he said, I'm a long-term pessimist and I'm a short-term optimist. I think in the short term, we can win some elections, but in the long term, you're right. Demographics are going to transform it such that we can't do anything. And then he just kind of shrugged. Jonathan Bowden talks about where he was talking to, I think, a former leader of the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party had, books like I have on the shelf behind me, talking about the bell curve, talking about a lot of these things you really aren't supposed to know about. And Bowden said, well, you've read all this stuff, you know the score. What do you think we should do about it? And he just said, well, there's nothing we can do about it. And it's like, well, you're the leader of the governing party. I mean, there's plenty we can do about it. We could change all this stuff tomorrow. And it's just like, well, no, there's nothing we can do about it. I don't think that they really believe that there's nothing they can do about it. It's that they don't feel justified in doing something about it. One of the core things we really need to internalize is that the people that everybody makes fun of, the liberals who have the crazy eyes, the rich, affluent, white liberal women or Jewish women who are going nuts at protests and screaming at you and everything else, they really do believe in what they're saying. You could say that it's dictated. You could say that they're just pursuing their interests. You could say that they don't really know what they're talking about. All of that might be true. But when it comes to what they are willing to go through for the cause, they believe in their faith, and it is a faith. They believe in it more than your pastor or your priest believes in their religion. Because what do pastors and priests do these days? They talk about being relevant. They talk about being defensive. They talk about how we need to have people understand our approach and understand that we're not these media stereotypes. Leftists never do that. They completely assume that they are right and everybody has to approach them on their terms. And that is the correct way to view things. You have to have a moral certainty that you are correct and the other side is wrong. And it's not just because, that's true in some metaphysical sense, but because you're not going to be effective politically otherwise. I mean, this is one of the reasons why on Twitter, I always say things that we have to cut through the nonsense. That if you see something like, let's take the Daniel Penny case in New York City, when you see blacks screaming, we're going to get your ass cracker, which is what they were screaming when we went to that court hearing. You have to understand, it's not, oh, they're protesting against racism, or they're mad about systemic injustice or something like that. It's like, no, they just support crime. They think crime is good. They think crime is funny. And the politicians and the journalists who support them do too. And we have to approach it on their term, on those kinds of terms.
Like,
the strongest historical force is spite.
So, in terms of like I say, like immigration. So, like, I know you're more on you're on the nativist side when it comes to,
Certainly.
of course, it's like the most, yeah. Basically, in a lot of ways, you are the straw man that the left will accuse like the entire the right of being. But
yeah, I'll take that in a second. Yeah.
Yeah, but
the know nothings did nothing wrong.
Yeah, but so what about the argument, like an argument in return, like for instance, you'll have like Latin Americans who are historically, like, demographically speaking, more socially conservative than even most whites. Do you think there would be a way? Do you think is it potentially viable? Could it potentially be viable to reach out to that particular demographic in order to bolster a conservative movement in the United States, or do you think that that's a lost cause?
Well, if you look at, let's take a population that is even more conservative on paper, like Muslims, what we've seen after a generation is that they basically assimilate into the dominant liberal culture. They become socially liberal. Islam has not been able to withstand the assault of liberalism within the Western world. And they obviously move into the political left because that's where their collective interests lie in terms of getting resources and power. So if you were going to try to, 5 years ago, I would say, like, no, that's ridiculous and we shouldn't even talk about this. But I mean, we have seen Trump, of all people, be able to win a higher than expected share of the Hispanic vote.
And even Muslim
vote.
And the Muslim vote.
Too, yeah. And we have actually seen the way that some Hispanics have reacted more forcefully against Black Lives Matter than many whites have. But the way you have to appeal to them is not by doing the way Republican consultants would, where you basically try to compete with Democrats by trying to appease them on left-wing cultural issues. You have to approach them in the sense that you're asking them to join the dominant culture in opposition to the left. Steve Saylor always says that, the only blacks or the only Hispanics who are going to vote for the Republicans are the ones who are already conservative. And so if you say, well, we're actually going to give you affirmative action too, or we're going to be soft on immigration, they're going to despise you for that. So maybe you can win some over, but the way you're going to win some over is also the way you're going to win the, shall we say, white nativist vote. I don't think there's anything to be gained by forming, say, a Hispanic caucus or a Black caucus or an outreach group or any of these things. I think those types of things, just objectively speaking, and if people have evidence that says I'm wrong, I'd love to see it. But I just think it actually does more harm than good. You're actually better off just approaching them from an uncompromising right-wing position, and you'll actually win more support that way. There's always going to be people who are going to want to join the, shall we say, traditional dominant culture, and that traditional dominant culture is coded as white and patriarchal. And if you approach people with those terms, you might win a significant share of the population. But I don't think it's ever going to be a majority. At a certain point, political majorities represent demographic majorities, and all politics are identity politics. And without a white majority, you're just not going to get anything even remotely right of center anywhere in American politics or anywhere else in the Western world.
Could you be an example of sort of a policy or sort of a scenario in which I'm trying to figure out the best way to word this.
Like where Hispanics actually sided with the political.
Yeah, let's say, and so I don't mean like some like I'm not talking about like some like dystopian future or anything.
No. Let's look at the last election. Let's look at the last election where in Florida, Miami-Dade County voted Republican, which is extremely surprising. I mean, we kind of forget because DeSantis has sort of imploded during the presidential campaign, but it's very impressive what he was able to do during the election. And it's like, well, how did he do that? I mean, did he approach them in apologetic terms? Did he approach them cringing? Did he approach them by saying that, oh, you know, I'm not like these other Republicans, I'm not a racist? It's like, no, he confronted DEI. He said these things are poisoning your community. He said that we're going to crack down on crime. He said that we're going to take all these cultural leftists and tell them to pound sand. And people respond to that. I mean, more than anything else, people respond to strength. And, you know, one of the things I like about Evola, and there's a particular speech by Jonathan Bowden talking about Evola, which I would encourage people to listen to. And he says, you know, a lot of the kind of political drives, you know, for status, for power, for strength, these things manifest in any political system whenever there's crisis. And people are drawn to strength, even if they ostensibly follow ideologies that says strength is bad. So if you look at people like the idea of like a strongman just like dominating their political enemies and looking alpha and flaunting what he has over everybody else. I mean, I think that's why so many leftists like Gavin Newsom, even though he looks like he should be a right-wing villain from like a 1980s movie, right? If you consider
he looks like
American
Patrick
Psycho.
Bateman. Patrick Bateman.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And if you consider the way that a lot of Hispanics were drawn to Trump, I mean, you saw a lot of people who were almost doing this like Latin American caudillo style support for him. Why? Because he was seen as a strong man, because he was seen as a nationalist, because he was seen as somebody who could crush his enemies. And if we want to say, you know, what's a country in Latin America where we could see how this model plays out if we take it to its logical conclusion? Well, look at El Salvador. I mean, anybody who says decline is inevitable or that victory is just not possible, I don't think any of us would have said that El Salvador is the most promising country in the Western Hemisphere 5 years ago. But here we are.
Surprising. That was a really surprising revelation. Yeah.
And, you know, you see what's happening in Ecuador, and maybe we'll see something like that. I mean, there's no reason that it can't happen in the United States. People are drawn to strength. And if you are strong and if you are victorious, people follow the strong horse. What the Republicans have done, it's not that it's morally wrong or that it's weak or that it's cucky or any of these things. It's like what Talleyrand said. It's worse than a crime. It's a mistake. It's politically stupid to start from a pose of apology and say, we're wrong and we're going to make it up to you. You always see this every year when Republicans go to the NAACP and apologize for their party's past. Maybe they'll say something stupid like, did you know the Democrats supported slavery? And then apologize for the Southern strategy and say, why won't you give us our vote? What you need to do is actually say, this is our position. This is what is good for your community. If you don't agree with us, you are wrong and you are responsible for the suffering that ensues. I mean, you got nothing to lose anyway. And then you move forward from there. That is a better approach politically. And I think if you look at how political results have played out over the last few years, and particularly if you look at the utter failure of a lot of these Republican consultants and minority outreach specialists and people like that to actually win any significant share of the minority vote, compared to the relative success that Donald Trump, whom the media never tires of calling a white nationalist, has had, I think that sort of tells the whole story for you.
And so let's talk a little bit about the election, because of course there's the very useless primaries, or not primary, but the very useless debates we've been that have been going on for about the past 6 months or so.
Right.
There's also sort of a big fear. Like, I know a lot of people who are currently like, okay, yes, I'm hardcore. Like, I'm going for Trump. Trump is the only way forward. And a lot of those same people are also like, okay, if Haley becomes his VP,
I'm off the train.
Which looks actually like, I'm not saying it's going to be, it's not necessarily likely, but it's in the cards. What do you think? Where would you specifically, or people sort of in your camp, what would be the alternative? Like, I don't know.
I mean, I think if Haley's VP, I'm off the train. If Haley's VP, I mean, I just kind of take that as final proof that what I was talking about, 2013, 2014, which is just sort of like vanguardist, almost openly post-American, where it's just like, the hell with this, I'm a white nationalist and the country is done. Then that may just be the only way forward. But I'm not going to say that. yet, certainly. I mean, I don't think we should panic until anything happens. And I think the more likely scenario is that he's going to pick a VP that's not going to infuriate everybody, but it's also not going to make people thrilled. He's not going to pick somebody who can overshadow him. He's not going to pick somebody who necessarily has the charisma or who carries out the kinds of policies that we would want. I mean, some people were fantasizing about like Tucker Carlson or something like that. I don't think that's going to happen.
I could see maybe as like a press secretary or something, but
maybe
like, even that's.
I mean, I think we're going to end up with who's that congresswoman out of New York, Elise Stefanik, Nancy Mace out of South Carolina, I think is a possibility. Kristi Noem, governor of South Dakota. I mean, I think it's going to be a woman, and I think it's going to be a woman who is kind of a moderate on abortion, frankly, because I think abortion is probably the best weapon that the Democrats have going into this election, along with all the trials that Trump's going to be facing. The problem with all of this, and you know, I know none of us really want to talk about it, but everybody makes fun of how decrepit Biden is. But let's face it, I mean, Trump is getting up there, and you can see the decline. Heck, you could see the decline in 2016 compared to what he was like in the 80s. And even if he manages to get elected, which I think, again, I don't think that I wouldn't call him a favorite at this point. I mean, I think he's kind of an underdog. But even if he does manage to get elected, I think that whoever the vice president is going to be pretty important, because that may be the person who ends up taking over. And we need to be prepared for a disappointment on that front, because MAGA, with very few exceptions, has not really changed the party. The party establishment seems to be very ready to just move past Trump and pretend nothing has changed. The only thing where we've really seen any movement is on questions of trade, where the party grassroots has like totally changed its mind regarding free trade. But whether that's changed the mind of any politicians, I don't think it has. I mean, you look at a guy like Mitch McConnell, you look at a guy like, Mitt Romney, who's still out there giving speeches and stuff. I mean, these guys are still in the party. They're still in charge. They're not going anywhere. And they haven't changed their mind about anything. They just think they can kind of outlast Trump. And the big problem with Trumpism, I mean, the thing that makes it kind of great and the thing that also makes it limited is it really is just tied to him as a person. And beyond him, I don't know who takes over, because we kept kind of waiting for an heir to develop, and no such heir has manifested.
So what about people like, I remember, and this was a really surprising one. There was, and personally, I thought he had a terrible personality. I think that was one of his worst things, but Ramaswamy. People were talking about, oh my God, he's the hero. He's going to be like the next hero of the right. It's like, I could not see that. Like,
I can't fully get into it, but I mean, look, he mainstreamed a couple ideas, and I think he probably has a role going forward, but I think people are getting a little too excited about him, and I can't imagine him as vice president or something like that. I don't think what he really brings in terms of building the coalition. I mean, you got to remember what Mike Pence was in 2016. Like, why did he do that? It's because he needed to nail down the evangelicals, right?
That's it.
And now he's kind of done that, so he doesn't need those guys. But what he needs to do now is he needs somebody to kind of bring back some of these wavering suburban Republican voters. And the way you do that is a woman who is not particularly hardcore on abortion, which is why, somebody like Nancy Mace may be who he goes with. Now, is Nancy Mace like going to, be the warrior princess of the American right and kick out all the migrants and save Western civilization? Probably not. But that's not how he's looking at these things. I mean, we are reading a lot into Trump that isn't there. But I think we already know that. We're all adults. I mean, nobody is still in God Emperor Trump fantasies from
QAnon maybe, but QAnon maybe.
Yeah, but even those guys are all, if you keep waiting for, you'll love what happens next. I mean, nobody's still acting like that anymore. It's just, I think we're all going into this with eyes open. It's just, there is no other alternative. There's nobody else who can bring people out. There's nobody else who can destabilize the system such that there's some possibility of change happening. And you go to war with the army you have, basically, and this is what we have. Because anybody who says, well, we need somebody else, it's like, well, who? I mean, I had a certain sympathy for DeSantis at the beginning of this, even though I think he made some mistakes. but he ran basically as a true conservative. And I think one of the lessons that the American conservative movement needs to learn is that a quote unquote movement conservative can no longer win because the Reagan majority is simply no longer there. You can't just have a conservative policy program with, Reagan style rhetorical populism. You could do that with the demographics of America in the 1980s. You just can't do that anymore.
So, what do you think that in terms of the left, how do you think the left would ultimately end up reacting to another 4 years, and not just the left, but like the liberal establishment as well?
Oh, it's going to be. I mean, let's take a step back and consider. God, I mean, it was less than 10 years ago, right? Let's consider what we had in 2015. I mean, keep in mind that was like during my more, shall we say, extreme phase in terms of like what I was writing and what I was saying at the time. And, I'm not going to repudiate any of that stuff, but, you say things when you're 23 that maybe you don't necessarily believe when you're 40.
Yeah.
And if you consider like what we had in 2014, 2015, the idea that you would be censored online was crazy. The idea that a book on Amazon would simply be unavailable, regardless of what that book was just completely insane. You got to remember, Amazon was willing to go to the mat to defend like some of the most depraved stuff out there, books that specifically told you how to get away with like really horrific crimes that I'm not even going to name there.
I know the anarchist cookbook wasn't banned, like was banned in
Oh,
recent
well,
years.
to hell with the anarchist cookbook.
Yeah.
I mean, the anarchist cookbook, I'm talking about, I mean, I'll just say
Oh,
it.
probably more extreme. I'm just using that as a broader, like
Yeah, I mean, but we're talking about books on like how to like deliberately get away with doing unspeakable crimes to kids. Like that's what I'm talking about. And Amazon, like, look it up. Well, don't look it up. You might get in trouble. Amazon like went to the mat to defend the right to sell that book. Now they won't sell White Identity by Jared Taylor. The idea, I mean, there was a report, I think just yesterday, I think Oren McIntyre is talking about it now, where the administration was having banks waive transactions where, it might have just been the bank itself, where people said things like MAGA or like Christian stuff. The idea that a bank could cut service to you, the idea that you would have your social media shut down, the idea that you had all these people who basically had careers and people who were on the verge of mainstream breakthroughs and who were beating the conservative movement, let us not forget, who basically were just cut off overnight because of deplatforming. The premise that it is the responsibility of every single democracy to curate the public debate, to fight quote unquote misinformation, to make sure that only certain people are allowed to speak, and that you can actually silence or even jail people for saying narratives that go against the prevailing ones. All of this is now completely taken for granted. People talk about transgenderism, people talk about, whatever other cultural trends. I think the single greatest cultural change in my lifetime, and it's only happened within the last decade, is how free speech has gone from a completely unquestionable moral norm in the United States to a fringe far right position that nobody is willing to defend except, ironically, quote unquote Nazis. I mean, if you go to a normal educated liberal, they will take it absolutely for granted that people who say quote unquote extreme things online need to be silenced and perhaps need to be punished. Trump bears a heavy responsibility for that. And if you look at the 2016 election, there were a whole host of people who, in the immediate aftermath, there was the notorious meeting at Google, there was the meetings at Twitter, there were meetings at a number of other social media companies where people said, we took for granted that opening up speech and empowering ordinary people would lead to a new wave of democracy throughout the world. You remember how excited everybody was about the Arab Spring, and we were wrong. It actually empowers authoritarians, and that's why we're going to do a 180 on this and make sure this never happens again. We're still dealing with that battleground. I mean, yeah, Elon Musk has kind of sort of freed up X a little bit. Jared Taylor's still not on there, though, for example. And that's just one thing. If you look at search engine results, if you look at Facebook, if you look at Instagram, if you look at TikTok, if you look at all these other things, it's all being skewed in a certain direction. And that's millions upon millions upon millions of votes. And there aren't a lot of ways to overcome that, particularly when something like Fox News is not particularly friendly to Trump or some of his messages. So it is an uphill battle. One of the truths about democracy is that it's fundamentally a government of money and media, and public opinion is dictated. Without controlling media platforms, and I mean controlling in as blunt and crude a sense as like the British occupying a coaling station during the 19th century, like it is that yes or no and binary. Without doing that, it's going to be very hard for Trump to win. And that's before we even get into all the stuff about voting and ballot harvesting and all that kind of stuff.
So how do you think the role what is the role of the sort of Israel Hamas conflict going forward, especially with because Trump has always been very unabashedly pro-Israel.
Yeah.
However,
Although he did call Netanyahu a traitor, which was pretty interesting.
yeah.
I mean, for not for quickly congratulating Biden right after the election. So, I mean, Trump again. This is one of those things where Trump is so myopic, and everything is perceived through his like the way people are to him, that it might lead to policy changes just because he's like mad Netanyahu snubbed him.
But yeah, I would say though, I feel like one of my the thing that really makes me wary, though, personally, about another 4 years of Donald Trump is very specifically because we're going to have to go through all that whole media song and dance again. Because, like, I did not vote for Biden in 2020, but part of me, like a tiny part of me, was tempted because it's like I am so tired of all of this TDS screeching. I don't want to hear about like all this nonsense anymore.
Well,
So.
there's a lot of fake issues. I mean, certainly there are things that Biden has done that if Trump had done, it would just be the end of his administration.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I mean, even the collapse in Afghanistan, I think, is one of the major things. But certainly there are lots of scandals where military guy. I think there's some Navy SEALs just went missing. Nobody cares.
Imagine if Donald Trump Jr. was in Hunter Biden's shoes.
No, I mean it would be the end of the world. And
Yeah.
the same people, the exact same people who are saying like it's not a big deal or President Biden is just a great father, would be having like shrieking meltdowns and divorcing their husbands over, not caring about this kind of stuff. I mean, as regards to the Israel Hamas thing, obviously there's quite a lot of pushback on the online right against Israel. But if we look at the polls, it hasn't changed too much in terms of the way most Republicans think. That's largely because those opinions are being shaped by Fox News. Now, one of the things that could change things is that Trump has to play a certain game where people need to be able to read their expectations into him. So he needs to win the votes of both the people who think Biden is not doing enough to support Israel and also the people who think Biden is essentially a slave to Israel. And, maybe even some of those like lefties who think that Israel is a white supremacist colonial state and that Biden is a war pig. I mean, some of those people need to stay home or vote for Cornel West or whatever else. And so, but Trump, kind of has been able to do that. I mean, you remember, I think it was like soon after the attacks, he said something like, well, Hamas has been smart or something. And he just kind of was like, he kind of took a step back and basically was just like, well, these are the contours of the conflict or something like that. I mean, just a statement like that would have been pretty unthinkable for any Republican, certainly within the last decade. I think he does understand that he's got to let people sort of see what they want to see regarding Israel and Hamas. Whether what that means for policy, I don't know. I mean, it's all going to depend on a staffing decision. Certainly, if he appoints somebody like Haley as his VP, I mean, that would tell us everything we need to know.
Yeah. So in terms of like economics and free trade, do you really think that's this is just something that came to mind? But do you think it's really even that? This is both. Do you think that issue is really something that divides mostly the base versus the elite establishment, as opposed to, or do you think? So I'm trying to. I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure out the best way to word this. But
do you think it's like still a salient issue? Is what you're asking?
yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't have much sleep last night. So.
No, it's all right. I mean, if you look at like Fetterman in Pennsylvania, for example, Democratic senatorman, he's basically been saying like he's been kind of speaking up about closing, steel mills and trade and things like that. He's been kind of seizing a march on the Republicans on that issue. That kind of old school Ross Perot, Dick Gephardt, if you remember, like old school Democrats, and Pat Buchanan
Yep.
think of
Yep.
like populist Republicans. I mean, there's still like a constituency there, but the deindustrialization of middle America has become a fait accompli. And a lot of these workers just aren't there anymore. And the unions who used to stand up for these kinds of things have essentially been replaced by unions who are staffed by service workers and illegal immigrants, and most importantly, government workers and cultural workers. And so it's something that it would be good to talk about. I mean, I certainly think that it's a major policy issue in terms of like the kind of America that I want to see is a country where we have strong manufacturing and we make our own stuff again. But whether it's really going to drive votes in this coming election, I have my doubts. Certainly, it's something that I hope President Trump talks about. And there are some opportunities when it comes to energy. If you want to think about, what it looks like in another country, if you look at Germany, where you basically have the wholesale collapse of the German economy and what some are calling the deindustrialization of Germany. Why is this happening? Because they followed America when it came to making rulings about energy in order to spite Russia, and because the Green Party closed all their nuclear plants. So now energy costs have gone up, and so now they can't make anything. I mean, German manufacturing was like the heart of that economy. Now that's falling apart. What's the result? The AfD is growing, and they're talking about banning the party. Well, the AfD is growing partially because of immigration, but it's also growing because like the German standard of living is collapsing. And a lot of the same processes are taking place in the United States in a less severe degree. There is an opportunity there. It's just you're not going to be able to do. I don't know if you can win Michigan or Pennsylvania by talking about the shuttered factories the same way you used to be able to. You're going to have to talk about crime. You're going to have to talk about opioids. You're going to have to talk about American communities being left behind in a more general sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think also with certain issues, especially when it comes to trade, like, yes, people, especially workers in this case, I think the Rust Belt, will feel the effects of certain policies. Yet at the same time, most people, and I don't mean stupid and like as an insult, but most people are generally too stupid to actually know what the causes of these things are, but they definitely do feel
Yeah,
the
they
effects.
just know something bad happened. I mean, to be particularly uncharitable, there was I think it was Walgreens, one of these stores, is closing in some black neighborhood. Now,
Yep.
obviously, the
Yeah.
reason it's
I was
closing,
just
yeah,
listening. I was just
because
listening.
everybody's, the reason is because of like shoplifting or something, and they get one of these huckster reverends or whatever come out there who's like, well, they need to just keep it in the community. They need to just put up with this, and so they don't. If you
Soup
try,
kitchen. It's not
yeah,
a soup kitchen.
if you sat them down and tried to explain to them that like the reason it can't be here is because you don't have a community, it's because you have a group of feral thugs who like don't understand that you have to pay for things, it would just go over their heads. Now, I don't think like white factory workers are quite in the same category, but if you tried to explain to them like, well, labor costs and environmental regulations are why we can't build steel in Michigan anymore or Pennsylvania anymore, and therefore this thing closed, it's not. They don't want to hear about all that, and they shouldn't have to hear about all that. All they know is that there used to be these things here that could provide for their families. Now those things are gone. What you do need is people who really do understand these things and who take it as a goal that, yes, it is a positive good for a country to be able to build certain things within its own borders, to be able to control raw materials, to have manufactured goods, to have skilled workers, that this is actually better than importing unskilled labor. It's actually better to have citizens who are capable of skilled labor and who can have careers that are capable of sustaining a family and a real community. But I mean, who's going to pay for that, right? I mean, how many people who are Chamber of Commerce lobbyists or Republican politicians or who work in the NGOs within Conservatism Inc., very few people are being paid to do the kind of research to justify an industrial policy that would put these things first and put these workers first. But, policy tends to follow politics sometimes. And I don't think that there is a path to Republican survival that doesn't involve winning the Rust Belt. So, I mean, you can't underestimate the intelligence of the people in charge of the conservative movement, but hopefully somebody will notice that, like, yeah, you're actually going to need these states, and therefore you're going to need a policy that can communicate to these people that we're the only ones who could save you.
And I think the 2016 election, I mean,
Certainly show that, yeah.
in the reverse was a really good kind of eye opener there, because where did Clinton did not go anywhere near the Rust Belt states. Like, she might have sent like even her office for like Rust Belt outreach state, or for outreach in the Rust Belt, was in DC. Her office
Yeah.
specifically dedicated towards that. Like,
Famously didn't even go to, what was it? Didn't go to Wisconsin, didn't go to Minnesota, any of these places.
I don't think she went to West Virginia either, even.
Well, yeah, I mean, she's not going to go to West Virginia.
Oh,
West
yeah.
Virginia's, but I mean, you know, West Virginia, was living there for a while, and you know, the thing with West Virginia is that, you know, this was, I think Gore won that. I mean, West Virginia was a core Democratic state for a long time, and now we just kind of take it for granted that, you know, the Republicans are going to win it by 40 points or something, and Joe Manchin, who's not exactly a progressive, is going to have to worry about keeping his Senate seat. Well, why is that? It's because these economic issues ultimately turn into cultural issues, and there is I mean this in the most literal sense, that all politics is identity politics. And fundamentally, what drives votes is this people supporting my tribe or not? And people in West Virginia just have a gut sense that the Democrats are not supporting their tribe. They hate people like them. And they're right about that. Democrats really do hate people like them. They want them to suffer. I think they honestly get off on the ideas of these, coaling communities in West Virginia suffering.
Basket of deplorables, as
yeah,
Clinton
I think,
said, yeah.
Right. I mean, I think that the reason they push these policies through is to hurt these people. And the reason they want to hurt these people is because they saw stuff on TV that says these people are responsible for all the bad things that happen. And whereas 200 or 500 years ago, people would get their religion from seeing a priest or pastor at the local church, now people get their religion from TV. And that is their moral code. And that moral code is more self-sustaining and fanatical than anything you're going to get in a religious community now, at least a mainstream religious community. So I think that the GOP has to, embrace that weapon, has to drive forward and say, we are the only ones who are going to represent people like you. But the problem is that the only people who have the resources to say something like that are not people like them. They're not people who come from the coaling communities. They're not post-industrial workers. Even a guy like Pat Buchanan, who was probably the best spokesman, the best tribune of the people that the American right has produced for the last few decades. I mean, Pat Buchanan was a lifetime DC resident and a professional speechwriter.
He was Reagan's press secretary. Yeah.
Yeah, he was not, he's not like a steelworker or something. He spoke for these people and he said, we need to champion the conservatives of the heart and this kind of stuff. But he didn't really come from those places. And that's the big problem that the Republicans have, is it's very hard to generate people who come from these places who can actually move up in the conservative movement, because there's a lot of snobbery and there's a lot of people who really look down on them. And we also shouldn't glamorize or romanticize what a lot of these communities are really like. I mean, a lot of the things that we see coming out of the Trump campaign, or the unofficial Trump campaign, shall we say, these kind of MAGA raps were Latinos for Trump and all these kind of really ghetto and low, just unbelievably low class appeals. Well, okay, but that's most people. It's
the right wing equivalent of the cultural appropriation raps you'd see on Comedy Central during Hillary's campaign, but just
right. But the difference,
lowbrow, but people still will. It's still going to speak to people, even
right?
If
but
the
difference is that if you look at the lowest IQ and the most conspiratorial voting bloc in America, I'd say it's probably blacks, left-wing blacks, but they're essentially just kind of harvested by the black churches. And there's a very efficient political machine that ensures that those people are going to vote, or even if they're dead, they're still going to vote for the Democrats, no matter what. For the Republicans, now that you've essentially lost educated suburban voters and you need these kind of working class white voters and working class, the multiracial workers coalition that Marco Rubio talked about, it's a much more difficult process to get those people out to the vote. I mean, I think it was just a day or two ago, the Democrats won another local election in Florida that the Republicans were supposed to win. Why is that? Because the Republicans aren't turning out to vote. whereas educated white people who are now liberals are turning out to vote fanatically because they're watching MSNBC every night and because they want to protect the right to abortion. Like those people go to the polls. These, white workers generally don't. Now they may turn out for Trump, but they may not. And if they are going to turn out for Trump, you're going to need to create a sense of excitement. You're going to need to have some infrastructure in place to get them to the polls. And there's very little attention being paid by the GOP to, rally these people and make them part of the coalition to build the kind of political machine that the Democrats have with black voters. And I think part of that is because Trump, Trump just kind of counts on his own charisma and media coverage to get these people to the polls, and maybe that'll do something. But I think when it comes to GOP staffers, they really hate these people. I mean, I see a lot of the ads and commercials and things like that, and I know I'm not part of it, and I might just be like, God, this is, pretty pro tier or whatever, but I understand it, and I have sympathy for it, and I do want to help these people. Like they are our people, whether we like it or not. And a lot of the things that are happening to them are not their fault. But I think within the conservative movement, and maybe even some corners of the dissident right, I mean, there is a kind of contempt for these people. And that's dangerous because without these people, you're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, there's never going to be a majority of like college educated right-wing intellectuals who maybe play paradox strategy games too much and have like romantic ideas about what America and the West could be. Like that's not going to be 51% of the electorate anytime soon. Like you need to have a coalition that brings in a lot of people who aren't necessarily of your background, but who you still have common interests with, and more importantly, are still part of your people. I mean, that's what it is to be part of the people. You have to love them, even if there are things about them that you may not necessarily agree with or like. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's just like you love members,
like your family.
Yeah, it's your family. I mean, like there are certain things that are just non-negotiable. Like, well, they're into this. Like, it doesn't matter. They're yours.
Yeah. But yeah, no, it was interesting. You were mentioning earlier, you're talking about a little bit about Pat Buchanan, who's a figure I've always found very fascinating, especially within recent American politics. Like, for instance, I think we've talked. I'm a libertarian, but yeah. I totally would have voted for Buchanan back in.
Well, Murray Rothbard too. I mean,
exactly.
As Murray Rothbard famously said, with Pat Buchanan as our leader, we're going to repeal the 20th century. I mean, a lot of the early libertarians, particularly the paleo-libertarians, I mean, Pat Buchanan was the most libertarian mainstream candidate of the 20th century. I mean, especially if you say as a libertarian, what is the what is the health of the state? War. And who is the one candidate who would have turned back the constant wars that have grown the government more than anything else? It was Pat Buchanan.
Especially after the Cold War, there's like no need for NATO anymore.
Yeah.
No need for any of this.
NATO, no Persian Gulf War, no second invasion of Iraq. I mean, if you pull American troops out of Saudi Arabia, arguably no 9/11.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Rudy Giuliani would get on your ass for saying that, but
well, and also, if we want to talk about the Hamas-Israel thing, if you don't have the alliance with Israel, which I think Buchanan would have, separated us from, you wouldn't have the current kind of permanent involvement in Middle Eastern politics that we have to deal with now.
Yeah, I'd say. So I was talking with Tho Bishop from the Mises Institute the other day. I know we were originally all of us and Marcel were all supposed to have something together on anarcho-tyranny a few months back that fell through. But I was talking with Tho the other day. I was asking him what his thoughts on the DeSantis campaign and why it failed, because he was a pretty big DeSantis guy.
Right.
And it pretty much echoes more or less what you ended up describing as well. And he said that he wished he would have courted more of the Buchanan or Bannon types.
Yeah. I mean, and this may get me in trouble with some social conservatives, but I don't say this in the sense that I'm opposed to it. I just think it's political reality. I think the 6-week abortion ban that he pushed really hurt him too. I don't think that. I mean, I think the repeal of Roe v. Wade was sort of like a death blow for the GOP politically in a lot of among these suburban voters. I'm not saying this is good. I'm not saying that like abortion is good or anything like that. But what I'm saying is that this is the political reality we have to deal with. And let's face it, I mean, degeneracy sells, right? And people are selfish and they want status. And if given the choice, most people do not choose to do the right thing. And for better or worse, people see kids now as kind of a liability. And I mean, I certainly don't believe that. And I think it's a disgusting attitude, but I think unfortunately that's the way most people are now.
It's like that
And
Spengler I know wrote, I think it was Decline of the, I think it was part 2, Perspectives on World History, talking about how when a society starts measuring, or what was it, when people start
yeah, I know
pros and
the
cons,
whole argument, right?
yeah, pros and
Like
cons,
once you even start like considering these things, you're already lost.
you're
It's
already
sort of
lost
like, you know,
society.
it's sort of like once, you know, Nietzsche talking about like once you have Socrates, like you're already in a state of decadence. Like once you're
Yeah.
even considering or questioning these things, it's all over. And it's the same,
Or,
you know,
or Descartes in our case, in the Faustian case. Yeah.
right. And it's you know, Augustus was trying to get the Roman aristocracy to have more kids, and he even couldn't do it with all these sorts of benefits. But I mean, the idea of, and let's, you know, this is one of the kind of what Evelyn would call like the mystery of decadence, right? I mean, one of the interesting things about all this is it's not just a Western problem, and in many ways, it's actually not even the worst in the West. If you look at a country like South Korea, say, where, you know, on paper it's more successful than North Korea. On paper, you know, it's obviously easier to make a living there and to live in a what I think we would consider like an affluent, comfortable lifestyle. But the women do not want kids. They are militantly opposed to kids. I mean, South Korea will just be a memory if demographic trends continue. And
Yeah, no,
there
like
doesn't seem to be
my roommate is South Korean. He was in the South Korean Navy actually, and he was actually like the other day he was telling me this exact same thing. So that's
right. And can you say that like, well, you know, there's a hostile elite that controls the South Korean media and is telling people not to do this? It's like, well, no. I mean, that's kind of that'd be a bit of a stretch. But a lot of these Asian countries, and it's almost independent of political systems, because you see the same problem in China and you see the same problem in Japan. And there's something inherent to modernity that sort of makes people not want to be part of, a lot of people at least, not want to be part of a people and to consciously decide that my line ends with me. And if you try to kind of hector people into getting away from that, which I think unfortunately DeSantis and a lot of other Republicans sort of fell into, you're not going to win. Now, I think there are things we can do about this. I think there are incentives that can be created. I think that there is something, I mean, a bit more esoteric and mysterious, that like once a people is optimistic that it has a future, which I think a lot of whites, especially now, just don't believe they do. When people believe that they do have a future, the birth rate just kind of naturally goes up. I mean, one of the interesting things is when Trump was elected in 2016, you actually did see a minor birth boom among whites in the United States. You saw birth rates go up among Spaniards during Franco's regime. There has been some indication that they've been able to do it in Hungary and some other places. Like there are things you can do, but I don't think it's
it's going to be the same in Argentina too. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's the kind of thing you can do necessarily by trying to like shame people into it. It's more of a question of trying to provide incentives to do it. And I think one of the big problems with the conservative movement, and this isn't just true with abortion, it's also true with like fiscal policy and things like that, is that it comes off as sort of like lecturing people that this is the right thing to do. This is, you know, we're going to give you your medicine and the medicine tastes bitter, but you have to suck it up because it's good for you. That may even be true, but in a democratic system, no one is ever going to vote for that. People want the mob exists to be flattered. People want to be told that what they already believe is good for them. And they want to be told that what they want to do is justified and also that it has no negative consequences. Trump is actually better at doing that kind of thing than most other people. And Trump, weirdly enough, even though he's responsible for the repeal of Roe v. Wade and all the evangelical Christians were not, Trump understands the politics of abortion, I think, better than most. Now, again, you know, I don't want to say like this to come off as like pro-abortion or pro-choice or something, but the fact is Roe v. Wade returned the issue to the states, and in state after state, especially even in red states, abortion is winning. And that's the reality. And we need to think about that because the Democrats are going to run in 2024 on defending democracy from MAGA fascism, January 6th, and abortion. And that's it. And barring a foreign policy disaster, which we may see, I think that's going to work for Biden, especially because, you know, why is Biden even the nominee? It's because goofball, old, white Americans who don't fully understand how radically the country has transformed can be kind of soothed into voting Democratic because they think like good old Scranton Joe is an American just like them. And they don't fully understand that he's kind of like the FW de Klerk of the United States, who's sort of, leading these people into the national euthanasia.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point,
DeSantis,
like,
it's really disappointing. I mean, I had a lot of hope for DeSantis, but and it's also just a personal thing. I mean, the charisma is just not there. It's just not. I mean, you either have it or you don't, right? It's like if somebody's a movie star or not, you can just tell. And DeSantis just doesn't have it.
like, please clap. I remember Jeb back in.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same sort of thing. I mean, DeSantis. I mean, it's a shame because, and it's also he was given bad advice because, like, let me, play like an old history thing here. I mean, let's imagine Trump is cruising to the nomination. He gets convicted of all this stuff in a few months. He can't run, or he gets sick, or he gets put in jail, or whatever. And then DeSantis steps in as the savior figure and is just universally welcomed as like the greatest guy ever. I mean, that was basically, if I was DeSantis, that's like the scenario I have in my head. And if that doesn't happen, then I run in 2028. He's governor of Florida. There's plenty to do. But for whatever reason, he was, there's a time in the affairs of men, and it must be taken at the height. And he was told that this is his moment and he has to act right now. And that was just completely wrong because as a lot of people could have told you, nobody's going to take the nomination away from Trump this year unless the courts do.
Had he stood back, waited,
stood back and stand by, right?
He would have very possibly. There was a chance. I mean, it depends on if Trump was always planning on choosing a woman, but let's say that's not the case. He would have likely become the first male choice to be the vice presidential nominee.
Yeah,
12
maybe.
years. 12 years.
And also, like, 100%. The thing is, too, with DeSantis, I mean, let's say he stands back, he's not running. Oh, the people of Florida have given me a great responsibility, blah, 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 blah. He doesn't get involved in the 6-week stuff trying to prove himself in the conservatives, because the only reason they did that was so he could win Iowa. We saw how that worked out. Trump wins by 30 points. And then, you stay as Florida, you keep doing what you're doing, you keep racking up wins against DEI and whatever else. Trump gets convicted, and then you basically get drafted and say you're going to pardon Trump. Now you bring in all these guys, you're a hero to all these people. And yeah, you still don't have the charisma and you still don't have, that it factor, but now you're running as a champion of Trumpism and you have that kind of residual support. Right now, instead, he kind of comes off as so many conservative movement guys come off, as a hector, as a scold, and as kind of an awkward, weird guy. And maybe that's unfair, but that's the reality.
Mm-hmm. Well, either way, thank you, Kevin, so much for coming on. I know we had to cut. I know it's a little shorter than last time. I would have liked to go a bit longer, but like I said, I have some things to do this evening. But fantastic to have you on again. Always like hearing what you have to say.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being on.
Is there any sort of, I don't know, any like work you want to shill in particular, or?
I mean, a couple things. I don't like being a shill, but I suppose I should just mention it for the heck of it. I mean, you can find my work on racial stuff at American Renaissance under Gregory Hood. On Twitter now, I just got approved for subscriptions, and I'm doing a column there every day, and I'm going to start doing some audio and video content. So if you subscribe and kind of help the war effort, all the money from that is going to go to equipment. We're going to eventually start doing streaming and stuff like that too. I just wrote an introduction for a book from Arctos called Esoteric Trumpism, so check that out. But yeah, I'm actually pretty proud. I'm actually pretty proud of it. So
no, I just really like that title.
It's a great title. I mean, but that's kind of like what we're talking about, right? I mean, Trump is, on paper, Trump isn't all that great.
I actually might change the title of this video to Esoteric Trumpism.
But the big thing that I want people to understand is, like, it doesn't matter about what people think about me or what I say or Trump or any of this other stuff. I mean, this is, if I can communicate anything to any of you guys, whether you're a middle-aged dad like me, or whether you're just starting out, whether you're a supporter of whatever e-celeb or online thought leader you're a paragon of, I want you guys to, like, really get it through your head that we really do just have this one life, and what we are involved in really is the most important thing that has ever existed, because if we lose, Western civilization just ends, full stop. It's not that our kids live in a crummy country. It's that they don't get to have a country. and the suffering is beyond parallel. And victory really is possible, but you have to believe it. You can't be one of these conservatives who sort of calculates and starts thinking about how you're going to make your departure and make your money. I mean, you have to give yourself totally to this thing. And every mistake in my life that I have ever made came from when I hesitated. And everything I ever did right came when I threw myself in totally without calculation. So that's what I encourage you to do.
Well, thank you again, Kevin, for coming on. You have a fantastic day.
Thank you. You too. Appreciate it.
Enjoy the snow. We're supposed to get more tomorrow.
Yes, absolutely. Love it.